I'm KatieQuixotic, and I am the DM for the monthly podcast Dungeons and Gamers.
And I'm Bryce, one of the players of the podcast Dungeons and Gamers. Available on YouTube and podcast services everywhere.
And what are we here for today, Bryce?
We are doing Ginny D, the popular D&D YouTuber and content person.
Content creator, cosplayer.
Yeah, content creator, cosplayer, cool person. Made the D&D tag, which is a thing where one of us asks the other questions, in this case, about D&D. So I only have one character to speak of, which you can learn their entire backstory and entire playthrough on the podcast Dungeons & Gamers. But Katie has been playing D&D for how long?
Ooh, the first time I ever played was actually in college. It was 3.5. So it's been a while. Over 10 years, something like that.
My dad has the 3.5 books. Like they have existed in my home for some time, but I've never like properly played. I don't know if I made had actual characters, but I know that my dad tried to have me and my brother play D&D when we were very young. And I just remember that like we were going into a cave and he's like, and there's spider webs in the corner. And I'm like, I cast a spell at the spider web because maybe there's a spider in it. And then we got distracted and stopped playing.
Cute kid stuff.
Yeah.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
But let's find out about Katie's exciting D&D life, starting with number 1. What was your first D&D character?
So my first D&D character was in that 3.5 game I mentioned, which was the very first time I ever played D&D was with 10 people, I want to say. The DM and 8 or 9 of us, something like that, all playing. It was massive. Now, several of them had been playing for many years, and they were definitely the we'll make your character for you because you might do it wrong. You have to do it a certain way or the DM will kill you kind of like mindset. So my very first character was a strong heart or lightfoot or strong heart, something like that, halfling rogue. And her name was Shu. Her name was Shu because there was this old movie whose name I forget, where these people wake up in a room and there are like openings on every side. It's like 6 openings because it's a cube. Maybe it was called the Cube or something like that. And they started trying to leave, and some of the doors murdered people. And so they started throwing shoes through the doors to test if they were safe until somebody figured out that the safe doors were prime numbers or something like that. And so I was the rogue with the super high AC that you just threw at things to see if they were trapped.
Okay.
Because it was hard to hit me, and I could get out of things easily. I told them I wanted to shoot with a bow, and they made that for me, and I was like, okay, I like rogue stuff, that's fine. So that was my first ever character.
Which D&D class is your least favorite to play, or do you not want to play?
So I know that this is one of those, like, somebody's going to be mad about it questions, and this is probably one of those, like, quote-unquote hot takes, but warlocks are the most boring thing I've ever heard of. You get, like, 2 spells or something, and, like, cool, you get, like, a summoned weapon, or you can have some extra spell list or whatever, but I have less than 0 desire to ever play a warlock. Just absolutely none.
You get that nice short rest, get all your spells back.
Yeah, but you still have fewer spell slots in a day, even if you rested. You'd have to rest, like, 3 or 4 times, and then increasing a numbers of times as you level to have the spell ability or like access to the number of spell slots. And of course, like it's top level all the time, but sometimes it doesn't even mean anything. Sometimes you don't even get a bonus for casting it at a higher level. So like, I just don't like warlocks. I just zero desire to play a warlock ever. And a lot of people have always been mad about that decision.
Yeah, all the spell casting classes all kind of like have their own thing of like wizards get all the spells, but sorcerers can do them cooler. And warlock, I feel, as someone who's only familiar with like who learned what all a warlock can do from Baldur's Gate 3, of going like warlocks can do this. I'm learning about other classes through that. which is cool because in my home game, one of the players plays a warlock, and then when they're like, "Oh, I'm going to use this ability," I'm like, "I know what that does now."
I know what that is. I love that.
But yeah, it definitely seems more like a, hey, I have these spells, but also I do other stuff too. I'm not just spell boy, and also I just really want to have a demon daddy.
I feel like there's a lot of RP potential for it, but I feel like the RP potential is no different than what you could get out of a cleric or a paladin. Yeah. And you have more resources at your disposal as a cleric or a paladin. I feel like warlocks end up looking like, it seems to me like they were treated a bit like rangers were in the like base rules for 5e, where I love the concept of a ranger, but in execution, it was a class that just didn't have the versatility, the power. It was very not, I don't want to say not well done, but it was a class that you had to love to play because you were never going to have the capacity to do the cool stuff that other classes could do. It just was underwhelming. It was underpowered. And I feel like Warlock has a lot of that too. If you're in the right situation for your Warlock and you all of the particular invocations you've chosen come up, then great. But if you're out of the situation where those come up, you're just kind of there, right? I don't know. I like versatility, though. That's kind of
well, this isn't included in the list, but I feel like if you're going to ask that question, you really got to ask the other one of what is your favorite class to play?
Bard. Although I've been told that I'm not allowed to play the College of Eloquence Bard, so I guess that's something that I'll never experience.
What's with that one?
Just, it's really cool and really unique, and there's a whole lot of reusing your abilities and stuff. I don't have the Theros book, so I haven't seen all of the aspects of it, but I watched somebody play one. Everybody says bards aren't necessarily OP, but they're OP when Katie plays them. And I don't even go out of my way to do that. It just kind of happens, I guess. Like, it just fit the role naturally. But apparently, the way the College of Eloquence works would be a nightmare in my hands. So I've been told by several, I think 2 or 3 DMs at this point that are like, I don't think we would survive you playing that. And I'm like, well, all right, that's fine.
Which D&D spell would you most want in real life?
That's one of those questions that it's difficult because there are so many good options. And I could think of a lot of really practical uses. Watching the video, Ginny mentioned Magnificent Mansion, which is a spell that I take a lot. I love that spell for the RP purposes, for the utility, for the safety. There's a lot of fun that you can have with a lot of different spells. But I think for me personally, what I would most want to have would be the 6th level heal spell.
Why is that?
I could just make people not sick anymore. Just go around the world and be like, okay, this doesn't have to be an issue for you anymore. People with cancer, you could cure it based on the way that it's worded. You could take away levels of exhaustion. So if there's a doctor who's been treating people for a long time and is worn out, you could literally just be like, no, you're fine now. You're back to tip-top shape. It automatically heals for like 60 or 70 hit points. It cures a level of exhaustion. There's just a lot of stuff that it does. It's a really good panacea type of spell, and I think it could just do a lot of good in the world with a spell like that.
The next question is, what is your favorite D&D monster?
I love pushing people into ethical conundrums as a DM. And we haven't done a whole lot of that just yet, but, who knows what's on the horizon.
I mean, there was definitely, in the first adventure, there was some ethical of but it was more of a trick to type ethics.
Mm-hmm. It was a test of what people would choose.
Yeah.
The greatest reward or the most good. See, I push people into ethical dilemmas all the time. And as a result, I really love Devas and Solars. And really powerful celestial beings because they can be corrupted. So they could be good or they could be evil. And also morality is sometimes 2 sides of a knife. Lawful good and lawful evil are a matter of perspective a lot of times. And so you could have a Solar who thinks that they're lawful good, but the tenets that they're committed to or the god that they're committed to could not be super great and they could be doing bad things. But because it fits their tenets, it doesn't seem like a bad thing. There's a lot of anti-hero possibilities, and they're just so powerful that they're scary. I think it's Solars they have a bow that if they shoot you and they hit and you're under 100 hit points, you just die. You don't have to roll damage, you just die. And so it's a nice, really big, powerful, but probably benign, but maybe not entity you can put in front of people, especially when they're having to make ethical choices. So I like playing with things like that.
As a DM in a home game, I definitely haven't thrown anything too crazy at players, but before we started recording, I think we were discussing monsters that kind of mess with the players' expectations of like literally what they think they know, and that's the kind of monsters that I'm definitely really excited to, like, mind flayers, anything that can like, hey, you think this is the case, but because of this monster, no, it's not. Is my most exciting ones.
Making somebody question their reality is definitely like an interesting character dilemma.
Yeah, anything where I can make the players as surprised as the characters is the best.
Agree.
The next question is, what is your favorite NPC/villain that you've encountered/created?
Okay, so I have a lot of favorites. I've had some very good DMs over the years who just weave wonderful stories and have this way of creating memorable characters that you truly feel not close to, I guess, but yeah, your characters and you both have like a bond with those. But one of the ones that comes to mind recently, I played in a one-shot run by a friend of mine, Sir Hamicus on Twitter and other places, who has these recurring NPCs that they've created. One is named Saltpeter, and his husband is Sergeant Pepper. And they have this whole shtick about he's Saltpeter because he likes a little salt on his meat, and then Sergeant Pepper is always on to him about how he should eat less salt, and they're just like, they're wonderful characters, and the way he plays them and the like accents and mannerisms they have just make them so full of life that every time they come up in a one shot or in whatever it is that he's doing, it's just like, I'm like, it's Saltpeter. I get really excited to see them again. And that's after one shot. So that was like a memorable one that comes to mind from recent events.
Has one of your characters ever died? And if so, what killed them?
So I don't think I've had one character death, I believe only one. And it was not necessarily scripted so much, but kind of in a way. It's the first really big campaign that my little brother ran, actually. And we were these children from this kind of like middle of nowhere village that ends up in the middle of a big thing, and kind of like tragedy befalls the village, and we're these like orphaned children that are kind of like destined for a great future as a result of this tragedy. And I was playing a druid, and we all got some sort of like fantastical boon. And they kind of presented themselves slowly throughout the story, and we were completely blindsided by mine. I didn't know what it was going to be or when it was going to crop up, but we all had like family members who perished in the tragedy, and mine was my grandmother. And we're in this city, and we're having this huge battle, and there's Empyrean Titans, and this Empyrean comes bursting through this wall and just starts wailing on me. And there are people, one of my really good friends, we've known each other for like 30 years. She's playing in there too. And she's very much like a paladin type of person. And she was playing like her childhood best friend. And she's watching her best friend be throttled, and she's trying everything. I think like she threw down like a warding bond. She was throwing all of her healing spells into me. We didn't have a cleric. So the healing was coming from a combination of like my druid, the bard, and the paladin, and like they're trying their damnedest to save me. This thing is wailing on me, and it gets to a point where I finally die, and it looked very because we didn't know what was happening, it looked very railroading. It looked just like my little brother trying to kill my character, because all of a sudden everybody stopped and turned on her, like all the bad guys kind of thing. And for a second I was like, wow, that was really intense. But then as she died, she had like not a vision, but she like met her grandmother again, who then imparted this knowledge onto her that allowed her to, like, once a week basically use her both of her B-shape abilities to transform into essentially like a homebrewed Empyrean Titan style thing. It got very epic level towards the end. And so it was like I technically died, but then didn't die because it had a whole thing behind it. But I guess that's the closest to death I've ever come. Usually they turn into gods. I've had many separate DMs, and never once have I asked for it, but they keep making my characters gods. I don't know why this keeps happening.
I mean, I feel like once you save the world, what do you got left? Just become a god, and then you just get a...
But not everyone gets to become the god, right? It just somehow keeps happening to be my character. Although there was one campaign where we all sort of ascended, but the rest of the time it was purely like just the future that DM decided was in store for that. Like after, should they be successful and survive, which I think is hilarious. Like this is like the running theme. I don't die, I become a god. Yeah. Anyway.
What's your best natural 20 story?
I think, I have some really fun natural 20 stories, but there was, I think the first time I ever really got to play a really high level character was in a group of people that I ended up playing with because of Critical Role. Funnily enough, we all met each other in the like Facebook group, and one of them decided they wanted to run a campaign, and it was kind of wacky. It was a lot of fun, the premise of it. But we started off as high level characters, and I think we were like level 17 when we were really getting towards the end of it, and we ended up in hell. In like this, not the 6th layer, because that's the fleshy layer. It was the cold layer. I forget the name. And Katie didn't know anything about this layer of hell, and neither did the character. So she's a bard. We were trying to like get into some place, and I did some music-y stuff, and it turned out that music was banned. Like it was not allowed except when it was sanctioned. And that resulted in us being kind of like forced into a situation where we had to do like a bard off with some like house bard, basically, who was like another like super high level character. And I ended up writing this was a Tal'Dorei campaign too. I ended up writing a whole parody to The Devil Went Down to Georgia. And I sang it. And when I rolled, and this was one of those like, we were supposed to end up in trouble and be indebted to this, I think anyway. I don't know if we were supposed to end up being indebted to this creature, but the DC was going to be wildly high. But I was playing a lore bard, and since it was a skill check, I could add my inspiration to my own skill checks. So I rolled a natural 20 on the performance check for the whatever we went down to Tal'Dorei or something like that. The Devil Went to Tal'Dorei, I think, was what we ended up calling it. I rolled a natural 20, and then when I added my inspiration dice to it, I also rolled a 12. So I ended up with like a 41 performance check or something absolutely ridiculous like that. And they were like, this figures. So that was probably the most fun, because it was definitely like Dueling Banjos bard off Battle of the Bands. And then I wrote this kind of like funny tongue-in-cheek song about the scenario, and then just rolled like the highest possible roll I could have achieved at that moment, with expertise and performance, of course. So like, just wild.
Did you know the bard off was coming, so you had time to prep, or?
I didn't know it was coming. The session ended up ending when we were like getting on stage. So I had a week to write it. But what we also ended up having to do was, one of the other characters had done like a 3 or 4 different class multi-class, and he was like 4 levels of bard. And he wanted in on it too. So we wrote it together and then had to kind of like dual perform it over like Google Hangouts, because this was a couple years ago. So it was a lot of fun. I didn't know it was coming up when the situation presented itself, but I did know I had time to write.
You didn't just free ball that one.
No, I'm not actually as good at improv as I would like to be. I thought of the song. I thought I was going to have to perform that day, and I instantly started scribbling down like, well, clearly I'm going to do The Devil Went Down to Georgia. That was the first thing that came up into my head, and I was like, all right, we got to run with this. We don't have much time, and I'm like scribbling down notes, and then he closed for the week, and I was like, okay, I've got time to work on this one. Thank goodness.
I have a good natural 20 story, but from the DM side, where these players, they are very new players, and of course I think when a lot of people, when they play their first character, they're like, I'm super edgy, especially if you're playing a rogue. You're like, I'm super edgy and I'm gonna steal everything. I'm like, hey, this is gonna cost me 5 gold, but no, I'm gonna steal it. And so the players wanted to go to the shop to buy something like fairly cheap. Like, he wanted like a dagger. He wanted to dual wield, so he only had one dagger they were starting with, and he wanted another one. And the daggers didn't even cost that much. Him and the sorcerer, who is playing a very like evilish character, they're like, okay, we're gonna work together and we're gonna go steal stuff from the shop. I'm running the Dragon of Ice Peak Spire, and so I'm reading, okay, here's what's up with the shop owner, and they're like, they were like an adventurer, they're pretty strong and stuff. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll come up with some stat blocks for them if I need. But as they were coming in, because like one character was supposed to come in and like be the distraction while the other one like slips in and then like steal stuff. So the first character walks in, and I don't have them roll anything. They just kind of go like, hey, how's it going? And then the second character is like, okay, I'm gonna try and sneak through the door, and so they don't notice. I'm like, okay, roll stealth. And then I have the NPC roll for perception to see if they notice them trying to sneak in, and they roll a natural 20. And so I just I just get like this big grin on my face in a like. Then the player's like, what is it? And he's like, and then he just kind of like slumps in his chair as I think he realizes what I rolled. And the NPC just like immediately knows like, hey, you're being super shady. And so the shopkeeper just like locks eyes on them the entire time. And so like they've had to deal with the shopkeeper again. And they're trying to be all like, yeah, we're heroes and stuff, and they're like, I saw you try and steal stuff. I got a natural 20. You were being shady as heck. So it's kind of fun when NPCs roll natural 20s against players, especially when like there was no reason that they needed to steal things. I was like, you need to come back to this town. If you steal, like if you got caught stealing stuff, this will go very poorly for you. But
I love teaching people lessons through stuff like that, because everybody's kind of used to video games where sure you might get caught, but then you pay your bounty and everything's fine again, a la Skyrim and Oblivion. And I was DMing for my niece and nephew one time. They were preteen age at the time ish. And they robbed this poor alchemist lady blind, took everything that wasn't nailed down, didn't have an herbalism kit, couldn't do anything with it, but someday might have had an herbalism kit, and so they wanted all this stuff that she had gathered. So they go off. This was like Mines of Fendelver. They go off and they're doing the stuff in that house that's in the town that they have to. It turns out to be like a hideout or whatever. And they come back and she has closed down. Her shop has closed down. She went out of business because so much of her stock was, like word on town was so much of her stock was taken that she couldn't keep up with the rent on the place or whatever, and had to like close up shop. I mean, and they had never faced consequences like that before, and I was like, and I did a bunch of rolls to see if she was going to be able to like recover enough to keep the overhead business costs going, and the losses were too great.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I definitely beyond the literal like the shopkeeper doesn't trust you thing, the players were, at least the sorcerer was very rude to the innkeeper. So I decided that because it's Phandalin that they're kind of based out of. There's like only so many shops there that I decided that the innkeeper and the like shopkeeper got together and they hired kind of a mercenary type person because like, hey, there's some people being threatening around town. Can you keep an eye on stuff? And I just kind of had the mercenary come up and introduce themselves and be like, hey, some people hired me because there's some shady stuff going on, and just saying hi. Let me know if anything seems off, and kind of going like, hey, yeah, you can do shitty stuff, but things are gonna happen because of that.
This isn't a video game. These people are going to end up being angry with you if you screw them over enough. Yeah, exactly.
Well, on the other side of the coin, what is your best natural one story?
I roll so many natural ones. I don't know that I have one that's particularly memorable. I think it just, I roll really terribly. I joke often about, like, I don't know why I continue to play dice games because the dice don't like me. Despite being, like, a dice collector of sorts, I don't have good luck. So I have a whole lot of natural ones that I've rolled, but I don't think there's been a super critical one that comes to mind, actually. It's just kind of like a thing that happens to me all the time. I fail stuff constantly.
The next question is, what is the highest level you've played a character to?
20. We did make it to 20. That same druid who got to be a Titan once a week. She made it to level 20.
Weird becoming goddish would do that for you.
A different person became a god in that campaign. I think that there might have been some kind of like ascension option, but after her, so my friend and her in-character best friend, the paladin ended up at the beginning of that campaign. She knew she was going to be a paladin, but we did kind of like almost like a zero session where we were playing children, so we just didn't have powers and things like that, and it was a fire that ended up ravaging the town. She was going to be paladin of Eldath, and she, as a child, like threw herself on the ground and pledged herself to Eldath if the rain would come. And my brother has her roll, and she rolled a natural 20, and then he has her roll a percentile dice, and she rolls a 100. But the rains came and, they didn't exactly put out the fires. But that started her path towards, like, ascension. And what ended up happening there was that Eldath was tired and was like, I need a replacement and it's you. So she wanted to start an orphanage back in our, like, we were given the land back from the local rulers after we had done good stuff. And it was kind of ours to do with what we wanted. And she wanted to open an orphanage. And she didn't get to, so my character opted to, despite being this like level 20 powerful archdruid, opened the orphanage for her because she didn't get to do it. So that was what she did once we saved the world, and she was level 20, and she was like, cool, I'm going to go open an orphanage now.
as level 20 adventurers do.
Yes, as you are wont to do at that point.
What's your favorite magical item?
That's another kind of, what's your favorite spell question? There are a lot of really fun things. It is often situational and I'll have different favorite items for different characters because of the cool opportunities that are presented by those items. I think if I were to have to pick a very generic sort of favorite, not generic, but, a very overarching favorite choice, probably the bard instruments, but I don't necessarily like the way the bard instruments work. They're just kind of really cool. I like Ring of Spell Storing. Oh, actually, okay, so I made a magic item one time that I put way too much effort into, and it was for a one-shot, so I put way more effort into this than should ever have been put into a one-shot item, but it was essentially the Wabbajack, the Elder Scrolls series. And it was my little brother who loves warlocks, which is what's funny that I hate them so much. He loves warlocks. He made a warlock of Nyarlathotep, the kind of elder, mess with your mind, drain your sanity, sort of, what are the Eldritch?
Yeah, Eldritch Horrors, yeah.
I was like, what is that word I always forget? Oh, Eldritch, right. Blast. So I made him a crook of Nyarlathotep, and I made a D100 table, and it had some really funny stuff on there. It could turn everything within a certain radius into chickens. It could summon a fireball on your location. It could completely give you like a full night's restore, which is really important for a warlock. But every time he used it, he had to roll. He never knew what was going to happen. And he only got to use it like a couple times. So actually that ended up being probably one of my favorite things. Just not only because I made it and I put so much effort into it, but because of the chaos that ensues from something like that is a lot of fun for a one shot.
Do you have a like favorite use of a magical item? Like a magic item that like you used in a cool way? Like because there's items that like you look at, like the alchemy jug that, you can make mayo with and stuff, is like, that's on its face. You're like, what am I going to do with this? But then somebody like, poisons the villain who has a mayo allergy.
Yeah, like an interesting way to use it.
Yeah.
So I had, this was also for a one shot, but the character that I made for that one shot was a very leveled up version of a character that I had made for a campaign that just kind of petered out as campaigns are wont to do. It was a She-Hulk inspired Genasi barbarian with a high intelligence. And we had developed, like, since we were starting off at level 8, I think, for that campaign, I've done so many level 1 campaigns that eventually we're like, no, we're starting at high level now. We're getting rid of all the little stuff. We're going to move on from this. So we started at a level 8, and we decided that another player and I decided that our characters were already in a relationship, like established, no slow burn. They are presented as girlfriends. This is who they are when everyone meets them. So you don't have to worry about like the development of that. It was already there, which I think is that's unusual. Usually everybody wants to play out the meeting and everything. And we thought it would be interesting to see what happened if that already existed and the choices they would make when they already had a really strong bond to one character and not to the others. And because that character never really got to see the light of day, when I had the opportunity to play in this high level one shot that we didn't really know what was going to happen. All we knew were that we were heroes that had served an empire, and we were tied to this building of heroes. What they did was they not killed us, I guess, or maybe we died, but our essence ended up being so tied to it that we were in eternal slumber until summoned to defend this kingdom. It's a really cool one shot concept run by my friend Adam. And we were each given the opportunity to pick a magic item, but I was like, well, we don't really know what's going to happen, and I could be generic and pick a cool weapon for this barbarian. But what if I picked something that was absolutely useless to this barbarian? It was purely an RP thing for a one-shot. So there's this mirror, and I can't remember the name of it, but you can look into it and you can see past events. And the concept I came up for why she was by herself was that the culmination of what they did to save the kingdom resulted in her love dying. And she had the mirror, when the kingdom said, well, what do you want in return? We're going to make you an eidolon. She said, I just want this mirror so that I can look back on the times we had together. So I don't, she's never gone to me truly, because I'll have this mirror and I'll have our memories. And so this is a one-shot character, and I gave them this item. And then what ends up happening in the one-shot is this beholder comes and attacks, but they're not attacking us or the kingdom. It's just destroying all the eidolons, and we were not really sure what's happening. And then very Spelljammer style, the mind flayers come out of nowhere, and we didn't know what was going on. And so then I could use the mirror to look and see why all this had happened. And it turned out that the warlocks made too many pacts, and the foothold was too strong, and everything was being destroyed because of the warlocks. Wow. Imagine that.
Those dang warlocks.
Yeah, so this barbarian has this mirror that she was just using for really sentimental RP purposes, and it ended up being oh, we don't have to do any more sleuthing for this one shot because I have this mirror. Just tell me what happened to cause this.
Yeah, those are definitely really fun. I know in Dungeons and Gamers, you presented a mirror that you were hey, this is gonna just be a way for you to get a charisma boon, and I'm like, that's my RP thing now. I'm like, I'm gonna do something interesting with that. And I think you probably presented it just hey, this is a excuse for them to gain +1 charisma, and I'm like, nope. Which
well, that was the functionality of it, but I also, because all of the characters aren't super known to each other just yet, I thought it would be another interesting way, because everyone can see what you see in the mirror.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting way to give a little bits away to the other characters when they look in and they see Fergus with this royal attire on, and it was only Roy that ended up seeing it, but Cookie and Bella ended up in a situation where they could see what was going on in the mirror for someone else, or for the other one. So they got a little bit of a peek into each other's characters that way. So there was an RP aspect to it too, but it was absolutely a charity incentive where the person was like, give them +1 to a stat. And I was like, cool. Do you have a way you want me to do that? And they're like, nah, whatever you want. And I was like, mirror of what you most desire. Sure. Sounds good.
If you had an IRL alignment, what would it be?
So I love alignment and it's all very matter of perspective, right? I think that I would be chaotic good. And I say chaotic good because I don't think I ever so strongly adhere myself to laws in the sense of you should always question your ideals, right? You should always be open to the idea that something that you thought is correct or a way you thought things were is wrong. So I don't think I could be lawful anymore. I was when I was younger, and every time I took one of those, even the really easy Damus intensive 130 question alignment and character quiz and stuff, I was always lawful. And as over the years I've gone from lawful to chaotic and then waver between neutral good and chaotic good, but I feel like chaotic good is my home.
I know for sure that I'm chaotic. I was watching Jumanji Into the Jungle before we were recording this, and I just the movie star and the kids were getting detention for different reasons, and I just stopped the movie and was ranting to my girlfriend of that doesn't make sense. Why do they have to do this? They shouldn't be in trouble for this. This is a dumb rule. And
that's why it can't be lawful, because sometimes laws are made by bad people and they're silly laws.
Yeah. Anyway. It was the girl was on her cell phone during when the other kids were doing the quiz, and the girl was oh, I had finished my quiz, and I was why is she getting in trouble? She should be able to leave. Why is she punished because she's doing the quiz good? And
I could say my thoughts on why school is the way that it is, but it would get really off topic. So
and they're very much I follow the rules that I think are make sense. I think I often describe myself as chaotic neutral. I don't. I think most people would say I'm good, but I'm you don't know my motivations. So,
That's true.
So it's I'm probably somewhere in the middle of chaotic neutral, chaotic good.
Well, that's why alignment's so malleable in such a matter of perspective anyway, because somebody might think that they're lawful good, but they're lawful evil by somebody else's definition. Yeah. Alignment is a lot about what you think of your actions and your motivations, but your actual alignment, there's the alignment that you feel, and there's alignment that you are, even as a character. That's true.
Yeah.
Because of that matter of perspective, in my opinion.
I think when I first created Fergus, I had him chaotic neutral, but I recently changed him to chaotic good, just kind of I think, Fergus will do what he wants, but also at the end of the day, do what he thinks is right. And that's, I think doing what he thinks is right is what's going to make him good more than neutral.
Yeah, exactly.
So
agree.
The doing what you want is going to be the chaos, but then if it hurts or helps is going to be good or bad. But then, of course,
and for personal gain is usually kind of a neutral thing.
Yeah. Which side, depending on which side of a war you are on, what you do could be considered good and bad.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that brings us to the next question, because that's how the order of questions works. If you had to date one of your characters, which one would you pick?
Well, I always play girls, so that makes it not as easy of a choice for me personally. But I think probably pre-ascended human form Hyacinth, who is also a bard. I have played things other than bards, but they always end up being my favorite characters. There was a lot of me in her, but she was very distinct from who I am as a person. And I think it would be interesting because she was always traveling and always she was a guild artisan who traveled to remote places to make guild contracts and also to make maps. So it would have been interesting and fun. And she was in general an interesting and fun character.
Is there a character you want to play but haven't had a chance to play yet?
So I think I'm kind of the opposite of so many people. I see a lot of people have like a million character concepts and are just waiting for games to play them in. I get to play a lot of games. I'm very fortunate in that way. I have a lot of friends who play. They invite me to play. Other people invite me to play on like their channels and in one-shots and in campaigns. And so I get to play a fair amount of games. But even if I didn't, I don't make characters by themselves. I make a character that is inspired by the setting that I'm about to play in. And I think that's maybe because I'm not like an artist who has really cool character concepts and then wants to flesh them out and draw them. And I feel like I see a lot of artists making a lot of characters because there's so much joy in the creation and the like aesthetic creation as well. And I think because I'm more of a writer, I need the inspiration. I need the spark for the character first, if that makes sense. I don't think I've ever really just come up. Okay, I've made one character actually that I made irrespective of a campaign, and she actually will have a really cool story if I do ever get to fully play her, not in a one-shot one day. It's also another bard, but she's got a haunted one background, and she has. Have you ever seen the pictures of that owl that's blind and it has like eyes that look like cosmos and they have stars and stuff?
Yeah,
in them?
I think you told me about this one, so I have seen that picture.
She's got a starry eye like that because of this medicine that she takes. But the medicine is highly addictive, so her struggle will be fighting or embracing the addiction and what comes from that. But it's kept the trouble, it's worked well enough for its purposes, but the side effect is this maybe sinister or unique looking eye that is very noticeable and makes her somebody that people remember because of that sort of trademark. So I'd be interested to explore a story. I introduced that character to a one-shot group that I used to be in on Facebook, and somebody wrote a whole one-shot around that character because they liked her concept so much that I got to play in. So that was fun. But I would like to see her in a campaign.
I think the beauty of DMing is that like if you have a character that you want to explore, like you can just make them an NPC in your story and play them that way. So there's no, if you ever have a character you want to play and you're a DM, you can play that.
Just play them.
Yeah, just play as many characters as you want.
Yeah, and I think I DM often enough that kind of probably satisfies that need I have, or that need that I would have if I didn't get to do that, and if I weren't always doing stuff with tabletop games. So, I think that's the closest thing to somebody on standby I have. I guess that and the barbarian from earlier. She would be interesting to actually play in a full campaign.
Are you a dice goblin or a dice minimalist?
Dice, more dice, another bag of dice, a box of dice up there that you can't see. I'm definitely a dice goblin. Let me show you the set that... Oh, no, it's not in here. My roommate and very good friend just gifted me a set for Christmas that's orange, my favorite color, and it's really shimmery, and it has little golden leaves in it. And now I want to play an Eladrin Druid for that dice set. It's gonna happen.
I've mostly played online, but somehow ended up becoming a dice goblin. So I've got a big bunch in here. It all started from Extra Life, the charity that we've played a game for, which raises money for Children's Miracle Network hospitals. They had a thing of if you raised enough money during August, you would get a special Extra Life dice, and it was like metal and stuff. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. I wonder if I get more like this. And then suddenly I have a whole Tupperware container of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I have mine. The ones in the little, it's like a little mini wooden dresser that you get from like Michael's, and I painted it. Those are separated by color. So I have a drawer for my purple dice, a drawer for my blue dice, a drawer for my green dice. Yeah, it's unhealthy. But then another one of my favorite dice, I think, is, you're probably not going to be able to see this, but it's got that like marbly looking pattern. And it's a custom made one that my friend Amber sent me. The 20 side on this one says yeehaw.
Okay.
In true Texas fashion. And the one side says yeet.
Oh, wow.
So it's my yeehaw or yeet dice, and I love that. That one's really good. Anyway, yes, so I'm definitely a dice goblin.
Yeah, I feel like it just takes like one really nice dice to set you on that path.
Yep, and the gemstone dice get me so easily. I have an opalite set. I have, one's not gemstone, I don't think. It's like glass, but it's the glass where they've treated the outside to make it like reflect rainbowy when you move it. And then I've got like a purple fluorite. Like, it's just, I'm a dice goblin. Very, very much a dice goblin.
Yeah, it's metal dice for me. I love the weight of a good metal dice and just the way it feels in your hand.
That's fair.
The gemstone ones, I think that was one of the first ones I got, but just like the heft of a especially an oversized metal D20 feels just real nice to throw.
Rose quartz. The size of like my nose. This is a hefty dice. I don't like the bigger ones because they make so much noise. I mean, I still like this one obviously, but I tend towards the pretty rather than the heavy. I know people like the heft of the metal ones, and that specifically is why I kind of shy away from the metal ones. But I do have one of the burnished titanium metal ones that is also rainbowy.
Yeah, you can definitely get some like cool aesthetics with the acrylic ones. They can get cool stuff inside them.
Yeah.
The last question from Ginny D's tag is, what rule or mechanic have you not quite wrapped your brain around?
So for me, I've had a long struggle with the concept of passive perception. Not that it exists, it makes perfect sense, but it so often doesn't make sense to me that somebody could have a passive perception of 16. Maybe they have the alert feat, or maybe, they've got their higher level and they have proficiency, or maybe they even have expertise in it or something. And you have a passive of 16, and then you make someone roll and they roll a 1, and so it's a 7 and they just don't notice. And I think that people probably don't use passive as often as they should, maybe, but it's weird to me that it's so common for us to expect people to be rolling for things like that, but then they could fail so terribly at something they're so clearly good at.
Yeah.
So if we have passive perception as a mechanic that's accepted, that's used, that's encouraged, that is even in feats that mentions passive perception, but then allow people to just fail at perception. I don't like that. So I often, when someone has really put effort, feats, points, whatever, into perception, I will often take their passive if they roll terribly, because I assume that they are, in general, that perceptive. Now, if they're in particular situations where it's harrowing and they're distracted, then I might let a lesser roll fly. But I'm usually going to give them more, even with a really terrible roll of 1 or 2, even though crit fails don't technically exist for skill checks. I'm still going to give them more information with that terrible of a roll or that low of a roll than somebody who doesn't have that many points in it, because to me, it doesn't matter how distracted you are. This is something that you're good at, and you should never just, like, as a bard, if I'm proficient in an instrument, I'm never going to walk on stage and so horribly just suddenly have such a bad day that I actually give a really terrible performance. There can be factors outside of your control.
Yeah.
Maybe the temperature changes and your instrument gets a little out of tune. But a musician's going to stop and tune their instrument, or they're going to, compensate for it or something. So I have a problem sometimes with things like that, where you've dedicated a feat or your expertise into a skill, and then we assume that you could just wipe out and fail at it. The same thing is like rolling a 1 when you're in combat and somebody's like, oh no, you trip and you stab yourself. Yeah. No, you don't. It's not real life.
Yeah,
I'm not even a great archer, and I've never shot myself with an arrow because I had a bad draw. Like, come on.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I think the as DMs, the recommendation for when a player rolls low is to say like something like, if it's an attack roll, the other combatant like knocked it with their shield or something. It wasn't like the player whiffed. Like they're adventurers, and they're not going to be whiffing wildly. The other person is going to like parry them or do something to cause it. It's not like, hey, you suck today.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I've come across this actually a lot, especially when playing one shots in that one shot group that I was a part of, where a failure would be abject failure. You stab yourself. You completely flop that performance, and people are going to make fun of you for years. Like, what? No, that's not how this works.
Yeah.
Do you have real life skills? Even if you do poorly, there's a level of competency that you can't really like underperform because of that competency, because of the time and effort you've put into becoming proficient or having expertise in that skill.
Yeah. You've got to think that because it's literally coming down to the luck of the draw. You're literally rolling dice, which is a luck thing that you can just turn around and make that a luck was not on your side type thing of like, hey, if a rogue is trying to pick a lock and rolls low, it's not because, oh, you can't figure out how to pick this lock. It's a thing of like, hey, the lock is rusty and seized up. And it's like like the pins just aren't moving because the lock is shit, not just because you were a bad rogue. It's like luck was not on your side. Or
you start to pick the lock and then you hear footsteps from around the corner and the guard shouldn't be back yet and it distracts you.
Yeah.
You know, something like that.
It doesn't necessarily have to be the literal thing that you're interacting with.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like specifically passive perception is something that should be used more, and it bothers me that it's a built-in mechanic, and that then we would allow people to so abjectly fail at a perception roll when they are perceptive beyond the bounds of most normal, like or most average individuals.
Yeah, I think more DMs maybe need to pay attention to the passive stuff, because I don't think those get called for much.
I like the random element of dice rolls because that helps tell the story.
Yeah.
Right? Like sometimes people shouldn't always succeed and they shouldn't always fail. And there's, reasonable successes and reasonable failures. So the random element is good, but there are times when.
Yeah, you should succeed, and there's times where luck goes bad. That's life. I mean, I've taken up lock picking. I got my set of locks the other day and have been messing with those. And I literally, I was picking, and I picked this lock 5 times within a minute. And so I go to my girlfriend, I'm like, Erin, look how quickly I can pick this lock. And the second she's looking over, I'm like, come on. And I couldn't do it. That's like, I don't know if I was lucky before or if it was this extra thing, but sometimes, luck just isn't on your side. Situation just causes things to be different. That's just DMing. I mean, we could probably have a video that is just us going through questions about DMing styles and stuff. But that is all of the questions from Ginny D's tag. Thank you for answering them.
Of course. Always happy to talk tabletop.
If you want to hear more from Katie or myself, we do a D&D real play podcast called Dungeons and Gamers, available on YouTube and podcast services everywhere. Or if you just want to follow what Katie's up to, here is her socials.
I'm KatieQuixotic everywhere that I want you to find me.
And you can follow me on Twitter at LastGeek, youtube.com/LastGeek, and twitch.tv/LastGeekPlays. Thank you, and we'll see you next time we see ya.